I thought I'd found paradise when she took me to that island. Just us, crystal water, and silence so pure it felt like prayer. What I didn't know was that she was using that silence to hide something that would destroy everything I thought I knew about her and about myself. Sometimes you don't get scammed for money. You get scammed for hope, and that's the one you never get back. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our longtime viewers, and he wanted his experience heard. I met Siriwan at a beachside cafe in Koh Samui during my 3rd month in Thailand. I was 58, freshly divorced, and running on the last of my retirement savings while trying to figure out what the hell to do with the rest of my life. The construction business back in Ohio had failed spectacularly, taking most of my money with it. My ex-wife had gotten the house, half my pension, and custody of our relationship with our adult kids who barely returned my calls anymore. Thailand was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to disappear somewhere warm where a dollar still went far and nobody knew about my failures. She was sitting alone at a corner table, sketching something in a leather notebook, her long black hair catching the afternoon light that filtered through the palm trees. When our eyes met across the cafe, she smiled, not the practiced smile I'd grown used to from bar girls or tourist guides trying to separate me from my money, but something that felt genuine, real, like she was actually glad to see me, even though we'd never met. "You look lost," she said in perfect English as I walked past her table, closing her notebook. Her voice had just a trace of an accent, musical and soft. "Are you okay?" I laughed, probably too loud, the way you do when someone notices something you're trying to hide. "That obvious, huh? Only to someone who's been lost before." She gestured to the empty chair across from her with graceful fingers. "I'm Siriwan, and you look like you could use some company." I sat down, grateful for human contact that didn't involve negotiating taxi fares or ordering food I couldn't pronounce. Her name meant beautiful gift in Thai, she told me later, and at the time I thought it was perfect. She was 34, she said, and worked as a freelance consultant, something vague about helping foreign businesses navigate Thai regulations and bureaucracy. She had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world, leaning forward slightly when you spoke, her dark eyes never leaving your face. "What brings you to Thailand?" she asked, stirring sugar into her iced coffee. "Running away, mostly," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "Divorce? Failed business? General life implosion?" She nodded like she understood completely. Sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely before we can find who we really are. Over the next hour, I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, about the construction company that went under when the housing market crashed and I couldn't pay my subcontractors, about coming home to find my wife Karen packing boxes and serving me papers, about my kids treating me like a stranger at family gatherings, like my failure had made me invisible. "Failure isn't the end," Siriwan said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her fingers were soft, but I noticed they were slightly calloused, like she worked with her hands. "It's just a doorway to something different." "Different how?" "Sometimes life has to strip everything away before it can show you what you're really capable of." She smiled, but there was something deeper in her eyes, something that looked almost like calculation. "I know a place. Very quiet, very peaceful. Maybe it would help you think clearly." That's how she first mentioned the island. Not by name, just as a place. She painted it like a secret paradise, untouched beaches, no tourists, just local fishermen who kept to themselves and lived simply. She said she had a small house there, inherited from her grandmother, where she went when she needed to escape the chaos of modern life. "I don't usually take people there," she said, her eyes dropping to her coffee cup. "It's very private, very special to me. But you seem different, honest." The irony of that word would haunt me later, but at the time it felt like the first genuine compliment I'd received in years. We spent the next 2 weeks together on Koh Samui, and for the first time since my divorce, I felt like myself again. She showed me hidden temples tucked away in the jungle, took me to local markets where she translated everything, and taught me to bargain for fruit and souvenirs. She made me laugh, actually laugh for the first time in months. We'd sit on the beach in the evenings drinking Leo beer and talking about everything and nothing, her hand in mine as we watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. She never asked for money, never pushed for anything physical beyond gentle touches and soft kisses. She just existed beside me like she belonged there, like we'd been together for years instead of days. When I mentioned that I was thinking about moving on to Bangkok or maybe trying the Philippines, she looked genuinely sad. "Before you go," she said on what I thought would be our last night together, "let me show you my island, just for a few days. If you don't like it, I'll help you get wherever you want to go next." I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why she was being so generous with a stranger. Why someone so beautiful and intelligent was interested in a broken-down American with nothing to offer. But I was lonely and broken, and she was offering me something that felt like hope, something that felt like home. "Okay," I said, squeezing her hand. "Show me your island." She smiled, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. But it was gone so fast I convinced myself I'd imagined it. The boat ride to her island took 3 hours through waters so blue they looked artificial, like someone had mixed paint to create the perfect tropical fantasy. Siriwan had chartered a long-tail boat from a fisherman named Kamon, a weathered man in his 50s who spoke no English but nodded respectfully when she gave him directions in rapid Thai. The language sounded different when she spoke to him, sharper, more commanding than the gentle tones she used with me. She sat close to me as we cut through the waves, pointing out rock formations and telling stories about local legends. "That one," she said, gesturing to a towering limestone cliff that rose from the water like a cathedral, "is where the ghost of a fisherman's wife waits for him to return. She's been waiting 300 years. That's dedication," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "Thai women are loyal," she replied, squeezing my arm. "When we love someone, we love completely. Forever." The comment should have felt romantic, but something about the way she said it made me uneasy. Like she was making a promise I hadn't asked for, or issuing a warning I didn't understand. As we got further from the mainland, I noticed fewer and fewer boats. The water grew clearer, almost transparent, revealing coral formations and schools of tropical fish that darted beneath us like living rainbows. It was stunning, but also isolating. I pulled out my phone to take pictures and realized I had no signal bars at all. "No cell towers out here," Siriwan explained when I mentioned it. "That's part of the beauty. Complete disconnection from the modern world." The island appeared gradually, rising from the water like something from a fever dream. It was small, maybe 2 miles long, covered in dense jungle with white sand beaches that looked completely untouched by human feet. A few wooden structures were visible through the trees, and thin columns of smoke rose from what looked like cooking fires. "There are about 20 families here," Siriwan said as we approached a small wooden dock. "Very traditional. They fish, grow their own food, mind their own business. They don't really interact with outsiders, but they know me. They'll leave us alone." Kamon helped us unload our bags, just a backpack for me and a large canvas bag for her that seemed surprisingly heavy for its size. The moment our feet touched the dock, he pushed off without a word, his engine already rumbling back to life. "Wait," I called after him in alarm. "When is he coming back?" Siriwan took my hand, her grip firmer than I expected. "Don't worry. I have arrangements. We can leave whenever we want." But as I watched Kamon's boat disappear into the afternoon haze, that uneasy feeling from earlier grew stronger. I was on an island with no phone service, no transportation, and no way to contact the outside world except through a woman I'd known for 2 weeks. For the first time since agreeing to come here, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. "Come," she said, pulling me toward a narrow path that led into the jungle. "Let me show you the house." The walk took 15 minutes through thick vegetation that seemed to press in on us from all sides. The air was humid and filled with the sounds of insects and birds I couldn't identify. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of the local villagers through the trees, mostly older people tending small gardens or repairing fishing nets. But instead of the friendly waves I expected, they watched us pass with expressions I couldn't read. Not hostile exactly, but not welcoming either. More like fearful respect. "They're shy," Siriwan explained when I mentioned their behavior. "Not used to foreigners. It takes time for them to warm up." The house was beautiful. A traditional Thai structure built on stilts with a wide veranda overlooking a private beach. Solar panels on the roof powered a few basic appliances, and rainwater collection barrels sat at each corner. It was simple but comfortable, exactly the kind of place I'd fantasized about during my worst days back in Ohio. "This is incredible," I said, setting my bag down on the veranda. The view was spectacular, crystal clear water stretching to the horizon, not another soul in sight. "How long have you had this place?" "My grandmother built it 40 years ago," she said, unlocking the front door with an old brass key. She was independent, didn't like being told what to do by men or government officials. Inside, the house was sparse, but clean. A few pieces of handmade furniture, some books in Thai, and a small kitchen area with a gas stove and an old refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner. What struck me most was how lived in it felt. This wasn't a vacation home that sat empty most of the year. Someone spent real time here. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, her voice suddenly taking on a businesslike tone that I hadn't heard before. "I need to check on a few things with the neighbors, local matters. I'll be back before sunset." She kissed my cheek and left before I could ask what kind of local matters needed her immediate attention on our first day. I watched through the window as she walked quickly down the beach, not toward the village but in the opposite direction, toward a part of the island I couldn't see from the house. That was my first real warning sign. I just wasn't smart enough to listen to it yet. Siriwan didn't return before sunset. As darkness fell over the island, I found myself alone, in a place where every sound felt amplified and foreign. The jungle came alive with nocturnal creatures making calls I'd never heard before, and the ocean waves seemed to crash louder without daylight to soften them. I tried to read one of the English books I'd found on a shelf, a yellowed paperback copy of The Beach, that seemed grimly appropriate, but my mind kept wandering to questions I couldn't answer. What kind of local matters took 6 hours to resolve? Why hadn't she given me any way to contact her? And why did the villagers look at us like they were afraid of something? Around 9 o'clock, I heard voices outside Siriwan talking to someone in Thai. The conversation was animated, almost argumentative, with raised voices and rapid exchanges that sounded nothing like the gentle, musical Thai I was used to hearing from her. When she finally came through the door, she looked flustered, her hair disheveled and a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead despite the evening coolness. "Sorry," she said, avoiding my eyes as she went straight to the kitchen. "Local politics. Very boring stuff." 6 hours of boring politics? I tried to keep my tone light, but she caught the edge of suspicion in my voice. "You don't understand how things work here," she snapped, then immediately softened her tone. "I'm sorry. It's just, island life is complicated. There are traditions, relationships, obligations. I have responsibilities to these people." She moved around the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of rice and fish, her movements sharp and efficient, like she was working through some internal calculation. I watched her hands, those same calloused fingers I'd noticed at the cafe, and wondered again what kind of work she really did. "What exactly do you do for the people here?" I asked carefully. She paused, her back to me. "I help them with business matters, paperwork, government things they don't understand." "What kind of business? I thought you said they were just fishermen." "They are." She turned around, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But even fishermen need permits, licenses, documentation to sell their catch. The Thai government is very bureaucratic about everything." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about her delivery felt rehearsed. like she'd prepared this answer for exactly this question. After dinner, we sat on the veranda drinking warm Thai beer and listening to the ocean. The stars were incredible, more than I'd ever seen in Ohio, spread across the sky like scattered diamonds. In the distance, I could see a few lights from the village, and occasionally, the sound of voices or music carried on the night air. "It's beautiful here," I said, reaching for her hand. "Peaceful." "Yes," she agreed, but her voice was distant. "Very isolated. Very private. Is that why you brought me here? For privacy?" She looked at me then. Really looked at me, like she was trying to decide something important. "I brought you here because I think you can handle the truth." "What truth?" Instead of answering immediately, she stood and walked to the edge of the veranda. In the moonlight, her silhouette looked smaller, more vulnerable than I'd seen her before. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "I want to show you something. Something that might change how you see me, how you see this place." "Sirawan, you're scaring me." "Good," she said, turning back to face me. "Maybe a little fear will help you understand what's really happening here." That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something: footsteps on the beach, voices in the jungle, the sound of boats in the distance. When I'd get up to look out the window, I'd see nothing but darkness and shadows that could have been anything. Around 3 in the morning, I felt her slip out of bed. Through half-closed eyes, I watched her dress quickly and quietly in dark clothes. She grabbed something from her canvas bag, something that clinked softly like metal tools, and headed for the door. I waited 10 minutes, then followed. The path through the jungle was treacherous in the dark, but I managed to track her by the beam of a small flashlight. She was moving with purpose, like she'd made this walk many times before. After about 20 minutes, I heard voices again, multiple people talking in hushed Thai. I crept closer until I could see a clearing where several villagers were gathered around what looked like equipment machines I couldn't identify in the darkness. Siriwan was in the center of the group, giving directions and pointing to different items laid out on wooden tables. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't fishing, and it definitely wasn't paperwork. I backed away as quietly as I could and returned to the house, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. By the time she slipped back into bed an hour later, I was pretending to sleep, but every muscle in my body was tense with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The next morning, Siriwan was different. The nervous energy from the night before had been replaced by something harder, more focused. She made coffee and eggs while humming a Thai song, but I could feel her watching me, measuring my reactions to everything. "You sleep okay?" she asked casually as she set breakfast on the table. "Like a baby." I lied. "Good. Today, I want to show you the real island, the parts tourists never see." After breakfast, she led me down a different path, one that wound deeper into the jungle toward the far side of the island. The vegetation was thicker here, and I noticed things I'd missed the day before: small security cameras mounted in trees, motion sensors partially hidden by leaves, and what looked like buried cables running along the path. "Siriwan, what is all this equipment?" "Protection," she said simply, not breaking stride. "From pirates, drug runners, people who might want to cause trouble." "What kind of trouble would anyone cause a bunch of fishermen?" She stopped walking and turned to face me. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, her expression was unreadable. "Russell," she said the first time she'd used my name all morning, "what I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything between us. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend you don't know." My mouth went dry. "Know what?" "The truth about why this island exists. The truth about what I do. The truth about why I brought you here." She continued walking, and I followed, even though every instinct told me to turn around and run. We emerged into a large clearing, and I saw the equipment from the night before in full daylight. It wasn't fishing gear. It was a sophisticated marijuana cultivation operation. Rows upon rows of cannabis plants stretched across the clearing, some already flowering, others still in early growth stages. Irrigation systems snaked between the rows, powered by hidden generators. Drying racks and processing equipment that looked expensive and professional were set up under camouflaged tarps. This wasn't some small-time local operation, this was industrial-scale production. Jesus Christ, I whispered. $3 million worth of product per harvest. Siriwan said matter-of-factly, walking among the plants like she was giving a tour of a garden center. 4 harvests per year. We supply dealers in Bangkok, Phuket, Koh Samui, and several international buyers. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman who'd sketched in the cafe with the drug dealer standing in front of me. You're running a drug operation. I'm running a business, she corrected calmly. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. This island is perfect. Isolated. No government presence. Local population that needs income. I provide jobs, security, and a steady market for their labor. The villagers work for you? With me, she said. I don't force anyone, but I pay better than fishing ever could. I walked closer to the plants, my head spinning. They were beautiful, actually healthy and well-tended, clearly grown by people who knew what they were doing. How long have you been doing this? 7 years. Started small. Just a few plants for personal use and some friends, but demand kept growing, and I realized I had a gift for organization, for seeing the big picture. And the freelance consulting story? Money laundering mostly. I help foreign businesses hide income, move cash through shell companies. It's all connected. She sat down on a wooden crate, studying my face with scientific interest. Plus again. You're taking this better than I expected. I'm in shock. That's normal. But Russell, you need to understand something. This isn't just about marijuana anymore. We've expanded. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? Expanded. She gestured toward another part of the clearing where I could see different plants growing, ones that definitely weren't cannabis. Opium poppies for the heroin market. We also import coca paste from Colombia and process it into powder cocaine. And recently, we've started manufacturing methamphetamines in a laboratory on the other side of the island. The world seemed to tilt. This wasn't just marijuana cultivation, it was a full-scale drug manufacturing operation that probably supplied half of Southeast Asia. I was standing in the middle of a criminal enterprise worth tens of millions of dollars. Why? I managed to ask. Why are you telling me this? Because I need your help, she said simply. And because I think you're the kind of man who understands that sometimes you have to break the rules to build something real. I stared at her, finally understanding why she'd brought me here. This wasn't about romance or finding peace on a quiet island. This was recruitment. You want me to join your operation. I want you to partner with me, she said, standing up and moving closer. Help me expand into new markets. Use your construction background to build better facilities. Help me manage the international side of the business. That's when I realized I wasn't just in love with a drug dealer. I was her next business investment. You're out of your mind, I said, backing away from her. Am I? She tilted her head, studying me like I was a problem to be solved. What's waiting for you back home, Russell? A failed business? An ex-wife who took half your money? Kids who barely return your calls? You told me yourself you have nothing left. I don't have nothing. I have my freedom. My dignity. Your dignity? She laughed, but not cruelly. You think the pharmaceutical companies that created the opioid crisis have more dignity than us? You think the alcohol industry that destroys millions of lives every year is more legitimate than what we do? At least I'm honest about my business. I wanted to argue, but part of what she said stung because it felt true. My construction business had failed because I'd cut corners, used substandard materials, lied to clients about timelines and costs. My marriage had ended because I'd been drinking too much and sleeping with my secretary. I wasn't exactly a pillar of moral virtue. That's different, I said weakly. How? Because it's legal. Because you paid taxes on your lies. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a satellite phone. I could call Kamon right now. Have him pick you up this afternoon. You could be back in Koh Samui by sunset, on a plane to Ohio by tomorrow night. The phone sat in her palm like a test. Freedom was right there, one call away. All I had to do was say yes, walk away, pretend this never happened. But, she continued, if you stay, if you help me build this, in 2 years, you could have more money than you lost in your divorce. Real money. Fuck you money. Money that lets you disappear anywhere in the world and never worry about anything again. How much money? Conservative estimate. Your share would be $8 million over the next 2 years. Probably more if we expand into Myanmar and Laos like I want to. $8 million. I tried to imagine what that kind of money could do. I could buy a house anywhere. Travel the world. Start over completely. Never have to think about Ohio or my failures or the way my ex-wife looked at me during the divorce proceedings like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. What would I have to do? Use your construction experience to help us build better facilities. Coordinate shipments. Help me manage the international side of the business. You speak English natively. You understand Western business practices. I need someone I can trust to handle the foreign buyers. And if we get caught, her expression grew serious. Thai prisons are not pleasant places. But Russell, we've been doing this for 7 years without any serious problems. I have relationships with local police, border guards, customs officials. I'm very careful. I walked to the edge of the clearing and looked out at the ocean. From here, I could see several small boats in the distance too far away to make out details, but moving in patterns that didn't look like fishing. I said, "Are they yours?" "Some of them. Transportation is a big part of the business. We move product at night, during new moon phases when visibility is low." "How many people work for you?" "Directly? About 40 between here and my operations on 2 other islands. Indirectly? Maybe 200, if you count dealers, transporters, and security." I turned back to her. "You run a fucking empire. I run a business," she said again. "A profitable, efficient business that provides jobs and serves a market demand that exists, whether I serve it or not." The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to take the phone, make the call, get off this island before I got in any deeper. But another part, the part that had been humiliated by failure, abandoned by family, broken by life, was intrigued by the possibility of power, of mattering again. "I need time to think," I said. "Of course. But Russell," she stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her shampoo mixed with the earthy scent of the jungle. "Don't take too long. This offer won't be available forever." That night, I lay awake again. But this time I wasn't listening for strange sounds. I was calculating. $8 million. A chance to be somebody again. A chance to matter. The devil's bargain was starting to look pretty attractive. Over the next 3 days, Sirawan gave me a complete tour of her operation, and what I'd seen in the clearing was just the beginning. The island was a sophisticated criminal enterprise with multiple revenue streams and security measures that would make a military base jealous. She showed me the processing lab where workers, mostly young men from the village, turned raw opium into heroin, using equipment that looked like it belonged in a chemistry department. The methamphetamine lab was housed in a concrete bunker hidden beneath what appeared to be a simple storage shed. Even the marijuana operation had levels I hadn't seen. Different strains for different markets, extraction equipment for concentrates, and packaging facilities that could produce anything from tourist-friendly joints to bulk shipments for international dealers. "The key," she explained as we walked through the facilities, "is diversification. Marijuana is becoming legal in too many places, so profits are shrinking. Heroin and methamphetamines have better margins, but they're riskier to produce and transport. The secret is balancing your portfolio. She talked about drugs like they were stock investments. Clinical, businesslike, rational. What about the violence? I asked as we watched workers carefully weighing and packaging white powder that I knew was pure heroin. Drug trade means territorial disputes, enforcement, people getting killed. Sometimes, she admitted, but I try to avoid that. Violence is bad for business. It attracts government attention, creates instability, makes everyone paranoid. I prefer to buy my way out of problems when possible. Buy your way out how? She led me to a small office building near the village where she kept her financial records. File cabinets full of receipts, bank statements, and what looked like ledgers tracking payments to various officials. I pay the local police chief $50,000 a year to make sure his patrol boats never come near this area. The regional border guard commander gets $30,000 to ensure our shipments don't get inspected. 3 judges in Bangkok receive monthly envelopes to make sure any legal problems disappear quickly. I flipped through one of the ledgers, amazed by the scope of the corruption. It was systematic, methodical, reaching into every level of law enforcement and government that could threaten the operation. You've bought half of southern Thailand. The important half, she said with a smile. It's expensive, but it's much cheaper than lawyers and prison time. That afternoon, I met some of the other key players in her organization. Charan, her second-in-command, was a former Thai military officer who handled security and transportation logistics. He was polite but watchful, clearly trying to figure out if I was someone they could trust or someone who might become a problem. Apinya managed the village workers and made sure the local families were taken care of. She spoke excellent English and had a master's degree in business from Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. I could have worked for a bank or a corporation, she told me over dinner. But this pays better and lets me help my community directly. Somsak was the financial wizard who handled money laundering and international transfers. He'd worked for several major banks before joining Siriwan's organization, bringing with him knowledge of how to move large amounts of cash without attracting government attention. They were all smart, professional, and surprisingly normal. Not the violent criminals I'd expected, but educated people who'd found a lucrative niche and were working it systematically. They treated me with polite respect, but I could sense they were evaluating me, trying to figure out whether I was someone they could bring into their inner circle. The key to our success, Charan explained as we sat on the beach drinking beer and watching the sunset, is that we think long-term. Other operations get greedy, take stupid risks, cut corners on security. We invest in infrastructure. We plan for contingencies. We treat this like a legitimate multinational corporation. Except, it's not legitimate, I pointed out. What's legitimate? Apinya asked. The tobacco companies that kill millions of people every year, the banks that knowingly launder money for cartels and terrorists, the pharmaceutical companies that deliberately created the opioid crisis. At least we're honest about what we do and who we hurt. It was the same argument Siriwan had made, but hearing it from multiple intelligent people made it feel more convincing. Maybe the line between legal and illegal wasn't as clear as I'd always believed. Maybe morality was more complicated than I'd been taught. That night, Siriwan and I walked along the beach under a nearly full moon that cast silver light across the water. She seemed relaxed for the first time since we'd arrived, like showing me her operation had lifted some burden she'd been carrying. What do you think? She asked, taking my hand as we walked. I think you've built something incredible, I said honestly. And I think it scares the hell out of me. Good. If you weren't scared, I'd worry about your judgment. She stopped and turned to face me, her face serious in the moonlight. But Russell, I need to know. Are you in or out? Because if you're out, you leave tomorrow morning. And if you're in, there's no going back. I looked at her face in the moonlight. Beautiful, intelligent, dangerous. Then I looked out at the ocean where I could see the lights of her boats moving product to markets across Southeast Asia. Somewhere in the distance, people were getting high on drugs that had been processed in the facilities I'd just toured. Lives were being destroyed and fortunes were being made, and I was being offered a chance to be part of it all. $8 million. A new life. A chance to matter again. If I say yes, I asked, what happens next? Tomorrow, we start planning your first assignment. I said yes. The words came out of my mouth before I'd really decided, like some part of me had been planning to accept her offer all along. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was the adventure. Maybe it was just the way she looked at me like I was someone worth risking everything for. She said, kissing me softly, "Welcome to the family business." The next morning, Sirawan introduced me to my first assignment. A buyer in Bangkok wanted to purchase 2 kilograms of high-grade heroin, but he insisted on dealing only with a Western contact. Too many Asian suppliers had burned him with poor quality products or short shipments, and he decided he could only trust Americans or Europeans. "His name is Chen Wei," she explained, showing me a file with photographs and background information. "Chinese, Thai businessman who runs a chain of electronics import companies. Perfect cover for moving product to international markets. You want me to fly to Bangkok? Next week. You'll meet him at his office. Let him inspect the product, collect payment, and fly back. Very straightforward transaction. What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong. I've done business with Chen for 3 years. He's reliable, professional, and very careful about security." She paused, studying my face. "But Russell, you need to understand something. Once you make this trip, you're fully committed. There's no pretending you stumbled into this accidentally." I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "How much is the deal worth?" $400,000. Your cut is $60,000. $60,000 for 1 week's work. More than I'd made in my best year running construction projects back in Ohio. The money was intoxicating, but more than that was the feeling of being trusted with something important. For the first time in years, someone needed me for something that actually mattered. The next few days were intensive training. Charan taught me about transportation security, how to pack product to avoid detection, which airports had the most relaxed screening procedures, how to behave during customs inspections. He showed me special luggage with hidden compartments, gave me cover stories to memorize, and coached me on looking like a businessman rather than a drug smuggler. Somsak explained the financial side, how payments were structured, how money moved through shell companies and offshore accounts, how to verify that transactions couldn't be traced back to the island or any of us personally. Apinya gave me what she called the most important lesson: how to read people. Drug business is people business, she said as we walked through the village, watching the daily life of families who depended on Siriwan's operation for their livelihood. You must know who to trust, who to fear, who to avoid completely. Watch their eyes, listen to their breathing. People lie with words, but bodies tell the truth. How do you know when someone is going to betray you? You don't, she said bluntly. That's why we have backups for everything. Multiple suppliers, multiple buyers, multiple escape routes. In this business, paranoia keeps you alive and trust gets you killed. On my last night before the Bangkok trip, Siriwan and I had dinner alone on the veranda. She seemed nervous, which was unusual for her. Since showing me the operation, she'd been completely in control, confident and commanding. Tonight, she kept checking her phone and glancing toward the jungle, like she was expecting someone. "Are you having second thoughts about me?" I asked. "No, but I'm worried about you." She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip tighter than usual. "This is dangerous, Russell. Not just the legal risk, but the psychological risk. Once you cross this line, you become a different person. Some people handle that change well. Others what? Others lose themselves. They start believing they're invincible. They get careless. They forget that this is business, not a game." Her voice grew quieter. They start thinking they're smarter than everyone else, including me. Is that what happened to your previous partners? She looked surprised. How did you know there were previous partners? You're too organized, too sophisticated for someone who built this alone. And this house feels like it was designed for two people, not one. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean. His name was Robert. American. Like you. Older. Divorced. Desperate for a new start. What happened to him? He got greedy. Wanted to expand too fast. Take bigger risks for bigger profits. Started using our own product, which I strictly forbid. Made deals I didn't approve of with buyers I didn't trust. Her voice grew cold. Eventually, he became more of a liability than an asset. What did you do? What I had to do. She looked me directly in the eyes. Don't make me regret trusting you, Russell. Don't make me choose between you and everything I've built here. The threat was clear, even though she delivered it gently. I was stepping into a world where loyalty was measured in dollars and mistakes were paid for with more than money. I won't let you down, I said. I hope not, she replied, because I really don't want to have to kill you. She said it with a smile, but I knew she meant every word. The flight to Bangkok was supposed to be routine, but nothing about drug smuggling feels routine when you're doing it for the first time. I kept expecting security to pull me aside, expecting drug dogs to suddenly appear, expecting someone to see right through my businessman facade to the terrified amateur criminal underneath. But nothing happened. The special luggage Karen had given me passed through scanning without triggering any alarms. I cleared customs like any other tourist and took a taxi to the Labua hotel where Chen had arranged to meet. Bangkok was overwhelming after weeks on the quiet island, a sprawling metropolis of traffic, noise, and millions of people moving in every direction at once. The contrast made me realize how isolated I'd become, how completely Siriwan's world had swallowed my old life. I felt like an alien visiting from another planet. Chen's office was in a gleaming tower near the river, his electronics import business occupying 3 floors with legitimate employees doing legitimate work. When I walked into his private office carrying a briefcase full of heroin, I was struck by how normal everything looked. He could have been any successful businessman discussing any legal transaction. Mr. Russell, he said in excellent English, shaking my hand. Siriwan speaks very highly of you. Please, sit down. The inspection process was surprisingly professional. Chen tested the product with what looked like a chemistry set, checking purity and quality with the thoroughness of a scientist. He asked intelligent questions about production methods and supply consistency. When he was satisfied, he transferred $400,000 to an account number Somsak had given me, using his computer like he was paying any other invoice. Excellent quality, as always, he said, shaking my hand again. I hope we'll do business regularly. Walking out of that building with the transaction complete, I felt a rush unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the money, though $60,000 was more than I'd ever made in a single week. It was the feeling of competence, of being good at something important and dangerous. For the first time since my business failed, I felt like I mattered. The feeling lasted exactly until I noticed I was being followed. I first spotted them at the airport, 2 Thai men in casual clothes who seemed to be going wherever I was going. When I stopped at a coffee shop, they stopped nearby. When I changed gates, they appeared at the same gate 20 minutes later. By the time I boarded my flight back to Koh Samui, I was certain they were tracking my movements. I didn't see them again after landing. But the damage was done. Someone was watching Siriwan's operation, and they'd identified me as part of it. When I returned to the island and told her what had happened, her reaction was immediate and frightening. "Describe them," she said, her voice sharp with concern. Thai, maybe 30s, well-dressed, but trying to look casual. They knew exactly how to follow someone without being obvious about it. Police? I don't think so. They moved more like private security or maybe military. She was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the ocean while her mind worked through possibilities. "We have competitors," she said finally. "Other organizations that would like to take over our territory or eliminate our operations entirely." "What kind of competitors?" "Myanmar smugglers who want access to our distribution networks. Cambodian crime families who think we're cutting into their market share. Chinese triads who believe all Asian drug operations should be under their control." She turned to look at me. It could be any of them. Or it could be someone new. Over the next few days, I watched Siriwan transform from the confident businesswoman I'd come to know into something harder and more dangerous. She increased security around the island, posting armed guards at the dock and along the jungle paths. She installed new surveillance equipment and began monitoring radio communications from nearby waters. Most disturbing, she started carrying a pistol in a shoulder holster beneath her shirt. "Are we in danger?" I asked. "We're always in danger," she replied. "That's the nature of this business. But now the danger is more immediate." The answer came a week later, when one of our transport boats was attacked by men in speedboats who killed 2 of our workers and stole an entire shipment worth over $1 million. Siriwan's reaction to the news was terrifying in its coldness. "Who were they?" Charan asked, reporting the details of the attack. "Myanmar militia. Probably working for the Wa State Army. They've been trying to expand their operations into Thai waters for months." Siriwan's voice was completely emotionless. "This was a message." "What kind of message?" "That they think we're weak. That they believe they can take what we've built without consequences." She looked around the room at her assembled lieutenants. "They're wrong." What followed was a masterclass in criminal violence disguised as business planning. Siriwan laid out a response that was systematic, calculated, and absolutely ruthless. She identified the Myanmar group's base of operations, their supply routes, and their key personnel. She arranged for weapons that looked military-grade and hired mercenaries who specialized in what she called territorial disputes. "We're not trying to start a war," she explained to me as we watched men load assault rifles onto speedboats. "We're trying to end one before it begins. In this business, the only way to maintain peace is to be more dangerous than anyone who might threaten you." The retaliation happened at night. 3 coordinated attacks that destroyed 2 Myanmar drug labs and killed at least 8 people. I didn't participate directly, but I helped plan the logistics and provided surveillance support from the island. When our boats returned before dawn, I felt sick at what we'd done, but also strangely proud of our efficiency. "Is it over?" I asked Siriwan as we watched the sun rise over water that now contained the bodies of our enemies. "For now," she said. "But there will always be someone else. Someone who thinks they can take what we have. Someone who believes we've become too successful for our own good." That's when I began to understand the true cost of the life I'd chosen. It wasn't just about making and selling drugs. It was about being willing to kill people to protect your territory, your profits, your survival. And I was discovering that I was much more comfortable with violence than I'd ever imagined. 3 months into my new career as a drug smuggler, I made a discovery that changed everything I thought I knew about Siriwan and my place in her organization. I was looking through financial records in her office, trying to understand our cash flow patterns, when I found a folder marked with my name. Inside were documents that made my blood freeze. Photographs of me taken in Ohio before I'd ever come to Thailand. Background reports on my failed business, my divorce, my financial situation. Psychological profiles that analyzed my personality, my vulnerabilities, my likelihood to cooperate with criminal enterprises. Credit reports, bank statements, even interviews with people who'd known me back home. Siriwan had been investigating me for months before we ever met. "You found your file," she said from the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in. "You've been watching me since before I came to Thailand." "Since before you left Ohio, actually." She walked into the office and sat down across from me like we were discussing the weather. "I have people who identify potential recruits all over Southeast Asia. Divorced Western men with useful skills and desperate circumstances make excellent partners." I stared at the photographs of myself taken outside my apartment in Columbus, images I'd never known existed. The cafe in Koh Samui wasn't an accident. Nothing is an accident, Russell. I chose that cafe because I knew you'd been going there every day for a week. I chose that table because I knew you'd have to walk past it. I even chose what to wear because the psychological profile suggested you'd be attracted to women who looked artistic and intelligent. The betrayal was so complete, so carefully planned, that I couldn't process it all at once. Every moment between us had been calculated. Every word she'd spoken had been designed to manipulate me into this room, reading this file, discovering that I'd been played from the very beginning. Why? I managed to ask. Because you're perfect for what I need. Construction background for building better facilities, American citizenship for dealing with Western buyers, financial desperation to ensure loyalty, social isolation to minimize the risk of outside interference. She stood up and moved closer to me. And most importantly, the psychological profile suggested you'd be capable of violence when necessary. You think I'm a killer? I think you're a survivor who will do whatever it takes to protect what's important to you. Just like me. I looked through more documents in the file, finding reports on at least 6 other Western men who'd been recruited the same way. Some had worked out well and were still active in various parts of her organization. Others had been retired when they became problematic. What happened to Robert really? Robert discovered his file, just like you did. But instead of accepting the reality of our relationship, he tried to blackmail me. He thought he could threaten to expose the operation unless I gave him a larger share of the profits. So you killed him. I defended my business interests, just like any CEO would do if an employee tried to steal from the company. The casual way she discussed murder was more terrifying than any threat she could have made. This wasn't a woman who killed in anger or desperation. This was someone who eliminated problems with the same emotional detachment she brought to managing inventory. What's to stop me from trying to leave now that I know the truth? Nothing, she said, sitting back down. You're free to go anytime you want. Charan can have you back in Bangkok by tonight. But you know too much about our operations to ever be truly free. You've seen our facilities, met our suppliers, participated in transactions worth millions of dollars. Even if you never spoke to law enforcement, your knowledge makes you a permanent security risk. The trap was perfect. I could leave the island, but I could never really escape. Siriwan would always know where I was, what I was doing, who I was talking to. One suspicious move, one hint that I might become a problem, and I'd end up like Robert. So my choices are work with you or die. Your choices are prosper with me or live the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I prefer cooperation to elimination, but I'm prepared for either option. That night, I lay in bed next to a woman who had orchestrated every moment of our relationship, wondering how I'd become someone who could be manipulated so completely. But as I thought about my alternatives, returning to Ohio with nothing, starting over again at 58, to living in fear of when she might decide I was too dangerous to leave alive, I realized that escape wasn't really an option. I was trapped. But the trap was lined with money and power and a kind of purpose I'd never had before. Maybe that was enough. Maybe being a criminal was better than being a failure. 6 months after discovering my recruitment file, I was running point on a major expansion into Laos that would double our heroin production capacity. I'd become efficient at moving large quantities of drugs, comfortable with the violence necessary to protect our territory, and skilled at the kind of calculated brutality that keeps competitors away. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It started with small compromises looking the other way, when rivals were beaten, helping to plan raids that I knew would result in deaths. Gradually accepting that violence was just another business tool. Each step seemed reasonable at the time, just a small adjustment to circumstances beyond my control. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Russell, the failed contractor from Ohio, and become Russell, the drug smuggler who could order executions without losing sleep. The change was so gradual that I didn't notice it happening until I caught myself explaining to a new recruit why we'd had to eliminate a village elder who'd been asking too many questions about our activities. He was threatening operational security, I heard myself saying, using Siriwan's clinical language to describe murder. We couldn't allow that kind of risk to continue. The new recruit, a desperate British expat named Graham, looked sick at the casual way I discussed killing. I remembered feeling the same way during my first weeks on the island, back when I'd thought there might be limits to what I'd accept. Now I couldn't remember why those limits had seemed important. Siriwan noticed the change in me, and she approved. "You're becoming exactly what I hoped you'd become," she told me one evening as we reviewed expansion plans that would put our drugs in the hands of dealers across 3 countries. Practical, effective, uncompromising. Is that a compliment? It's a recognition of reality. The Russell who came to this island 6 months ago could never have built what we're building now. He was too soft, too concerned with abstractions like morality and conscience. This version of you understands that survival requires adaptation. She was right. The man who'd sat in that Koh Samui cafe sketching pictures of his broken life couldn't have planned the systematic elimination of a competing drug operation. He couldn't have calculated the profit margins on human misery or negotiated with suppliers who measured success in overdose statistics. But I could. I'd become someone who thought in terms of market share and acceptable losses, who solved problems with money and violence, who saw other people as assets or obstacles rather than human beings. And the terrifying part wasn't that I'd changed it, was that I liked who I'd become. The island that had seemed like paradise when I first arrived now felt like home. Not because it was beautiful or peaceful, but because it was mine. I'd helped build something powerful and profitable and permanent. Something that would outlast me and generate wealth for decades to come. For the first time in my life, I was part of something that mattered. Late at night, when the jungle was quiet and the boats were out moving product to customers across Southeast Asia, I'd sit on the veranda and think about the life I'd left behind. The failed business, the bitter divorce, the children who'd grown up to be strangers. None of it seemed real anymore, like it had happened to someone else in another lifetime. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd taken Siriwan's satellite phone that first day and called for rescue. Would I have returned to Ohio and rebuilt my life somehow? Found a job, maybe gotten remarried, died peacefully in some retirement home, surrounded by grandchildren I'd never had? But those thoughts never lasted long. The truth was, I'd been dying slowly in Ohio, drowning in failure and regret and the grinding mediocrity of a life that had never lived up to its promises. Siriwan hadn't corrupted me, she'd revealed who I really was underneath all the social conditioning and moral pretense. I was someone who could thrive in a world without rules, someone who could build something meaningful when freed from the constraints of legality and conventional morality. I was a criminal, and I was good at it, and that was enough. The realization came to me one morning as I watched the sun rise over water that contained the secrets of a dozen violent acts I'd helped orchestrate. I wasn't trapped on this island anymore. I was home. And I had no intention of ever leaving. This was who I'd always been, deep down beneath the construction worker, and the husband and the father. This was who I was meant to become, and for the first time in 58 years, I was exactly where I belonged.